I need to put the delivery in storage.
A $400 tip on a receipt next to a plate of half-eaten oxtail. That's where this story starts. Not with a plan. Not with a vision board or a 5-year strategy or any of the things people say you need before your life can change. Just a receipt, a ridiculous amount of money, and a Tuesday that nobody saw coming. Most people who get fired from a restaurant end up looking for another job. Kezia Marshall got fired from a restaurant and accidentally ended up running a criminal empire. She didn't know it was a criminal empire. She thought it was a staffing problem. Kezia Marshall was 27 years old and had been late on rent for 3 months. Not dramatically late. Not crisis call your mother late. Just the specific grinding kind of late where you've already done the math in your head at 3 a.m., you know exactly how many more shifts you need, and you are running out of days to get them in. She had a journal she carried everywhere. A battered, overstuffed thing she called her business Bible. That was half operational notes and half the internal monologue of a woman who was significantly smarter than every situation she kept finding herself in. She had written on the inside front cover, in her own handwriting, "I don't have a 5-year plan. I have a 5-minute plan and I'm already behind." It was a Tuesday when everything changed. But on that Tuesday, Kezia didn't know anything was changing. She just knew the walk-in freezer was making a sound it shouldn't, the lunch rush was already 10 minutes from hitting, and table 3 had a man sitting in it who had the energy of someone about to send something back twice. She was right about table 3. She was always right about table 3. The restaurant was a mid-level soul food diner that had been in the neighborhood long enough to be part of the neighborhood's identity. The kind of place where the booths had seen decades of first dates and family arguments and Sunday after-church gatherings. Where the regulars didn't need menus and the staff knew their orders by heart, and the cornbread was made fresh every morning by a woman named Rosa who arrived before anyone else, and left after everyone else and never once discussed her personal life with anybody. The restaurant was not glamorous. It was not Instagram-worthy. It was warm and it was real and it had been feeding people for 23 years, and that meant something even if nobody had put it into a mission statement. Kezia ran the floor the way generals run campaigns, with total situational awareness, complete authority she'd never been formally given, and the kind of calm under pressure that people spend thousands of dollars on therapy trying to learn. She handled table 3, the man who sent his oxtail back once because it was too rich, and then sent it back again because apparently too rich had now become not rich enough. With the patience of someone doing long division in their head while smiling with their whole face. She read him in 30 seconds, adjusted her approach, brought him the cornbread as a peace offering while the kitchen fixed his plate. He softened immediately, left a $12 tip on a $40 bill. She knew he would. She'd known before he sat down. She handled a small kitchen fire, a missing order for table 9, and a coworker named Deja who was having what could only be described as an emotional event near the walk-in freezer. All in the span of about 8 minutes. She did not raise her, she unpinned it from the board. Read it a third time slower. Then she pinned it back up, picked up her apron from its hook, and tied it on. "Okay then," she said to nobody. She had no idea that the man who had left $400 on a wobbling table for a plate of oxtail had, in the 12 hours since, acquired the building, the kitchen equipment, the parking lot, the vendor contracts, and, through a series of events that involved a phone call, a very short negotiation, and what Miss Gloria would later describe as kind eyes and a firm handshake, her grandmother's secret mac and cheese recipe. She would find out about the mac and cheese later. The response to that particular piece of information would take several minutes and require her to sit down. But first, the menus. The new laminated menus featured, on their front page, in a font that had clearly been chosen by someone with strong aesthetic opinions. Doenjang collard greens. Gochujang oxtail reduction. Black bean porridge with hot sauce. Something listed simply as kimchi cornbread, that Kezia read 3 times in a row hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made more sense in this restaurant, in this neighborhood on a Wednesday morning. They did not rearrange. She looked at the kitchen. The kitchen looked back at her. She picked up the dry erase marker from the ledge beneath the specials board, uncapped it, and wrote in her own clean handwriting the original menu. Every item, every price, from memory without hesitation, because she had been looking at this menu 5 days a week for 2 years and she knew it the way she knew her own address. Then she walked into the kitchen and said, calmly, "We're doing the regular menu today." The kitchen, which had been collectively holding its breath since discovering the new laminated situation approximately 40 minutes earlier, exhaled as one organism and got to work. The entire Tuesday lunch rush was served the original menu. Every table. Not one complaint, not one confusion, not one item from the new laminated vision that the new owner had apparently constructed without consulting anyone who had ever actually worked in a restaurant on a Tuesday. Miss Johnson got her oxtail. Table 3 got their cornbread. The kitchen ran clean. The floor ran clean. Kezia ran it all the way she always ran it. Like someone who was born to run something significantly larger than this and was doing it here anyway because here is where she was. Mr. Yoon Jae-han arrived at 2 p.m. He walked through the door in the same controlled way he did everything, scanned the room the way people scan rooms when they are used to knowing everything in them, and stopped. His eyes found the specials board. The handwritten specials board. The specials board that said, in Kezia's handwriting, exactly what it had said every day for the last 2 years. He stood in the middle of the dining room in a $3,000 suit and looked at the board. 45 seconds passed. Kezia counted them from behind the host stand. She knew he was counting too. That was fine. She had time. "I changed the menu," he said finally. His voice had the same quality it had on Tuesday. Quiet, precise, and somehow louder than the room. "I know," said Kezia. "I changed it back. A beat." "You cannot change it back." "Sir," said Kezia, and she said it with the specific patience of someone who has been explaining obvious things to people in positions of authority her entire career. Table 6 just cried over the oxtail. Cried. Miss Johnson has been coming here for 20 years and today she sat down, saw her regular order, and had tears in her eyes. "You want me to take that away from her?" Mr. Yoon looked at table 6. Miss Johnson was, in fact, still visibly emotional over her plate, patting her eyes with a paper napkin and murmuring something appreciative to her food that no one else could hear. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at Kezia. His face did the specific thing that controlled men's faces do when they have encountered a situation for which they have no prepared response. It did nothing. Absolutely nothing. With an enormous amount of effort behind the nothing. He left. He said nothing else. He simply turned, walked back to the door, and was gone. The original menu stayed. 3 days later, without announcement, the new menus reappeared, but with 3 items added as chef specials. Kimchi cornbread, gochujang glazed ribs, a doenjang-based collard green dish that was, it had to be admitted, extremely good. These additions were presented to the staff as a planned evolution of the menu concept. Nobody was asked where the concept had come from. Nobody asked back. Kezia let him have it. Barely. That night, after the last table had gone and the kitchen had closed and the restaurant had settled into the particular quiet of a place that has been loud all day, Mr. Yoon came back. He let himself in with a key nobody had known he had and stood in the empty dining room. He looked at the handwritten specials board for a long time. The room was dark except for the low light above the counter. Outside, the neighborhood was doing its nighttime things. Voices, a car, someone's music 2 floors up. Inside, there was just a man standing in a restaurant he had bought for reasons he had told no one, looking at a board that a woman he had just met had rewritten in defiance of him. He took out his phone. He took a photo of the board. Then he turned off the light and locked the door behind him. Kezia never knew he did that, but the audience does. And that gap between what these 2 people show each other and what they carry alone is where this entire story lives. By the 3rd week of new management, the restaurant had developed a rhythm that nobody had designed and nobody could fully explain. The floor ran better. The kitchen communicated more cleanly. The regulars were happier, not because anything had dramatically changed, but because the person running the room was running it with the full force of her attention, and rooms feel different when someone is genuinely paying attention to them. Kezia had not been given a new title. She had not been given a formal increase in responsibility. She had simply, in the way she always had, assumed authority over every situation that needed it and waited for the paperwork to catch up. The paperwork, in this case, was going to take a while. because the new owner held staff meetings in the back room that were not about the restaurant. It started on a Thursday morning. Kezia arrived early to sign for a catering delivery. 60 pounds of product that needed to go in the back storage room before the lunch setup began. She came through the side entrance, navigated the hallway with her clipboard, pushed open the back room door with her shoulder, and walked directly into a meeting that was not on any schedule she had been given. Mr. Yoon was at the head of the table. 3 men she had come to think of collectively as the door situation were seated around him. Men in dark suits who stood near the restaurant entrance during operating hours with the focused stillness of people who were there for a reason that had nothing to do with food service. They were not, as far as Kezia had been able to determine, employed in any capacity that appeared on the staff roster. She had asked about this once. Mr. Yoon had looked at her for a moment and said, "Security." She had written security unclear in the business Bible and moved on. There was also, at the far end of the table, a man she hadn't seen before, slightly younger than Yoon, with the alert, quietly amused energy of someone who spent most of his time watching other people and finding it interesting. He looked up when Kezia walked in and something in his expression shifted. Not alarm, not recognition, just a rapid recalibration, like someone adjusting the settings on a piece of equipment. Kezia stood in the doorway with 60 pounds of catering product on a dolly and looked at the room. The room looked back at her. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. This was, she realized, because nobody knew what to do. In all the scenarios these men had prepared for, and they had clearly prepared for many, a woman with a clipboard and a delivery dolly walking in mid-meeting was not among them. She looked at Mr. Yoon. "I need to put this in storage." Mr. Yoon looked at her, looked at his associates, looked back at her, and then, because he was a man who did not show uncertainty under any circumstances, he made a decision. "Sit down," he said. "We're having a staff meeting." Kezia looked at the men around the table, looked at the dolly. "I have 60 pounds of. Leave it in the hall. Sit down." She left the dolly in the hall. She sat down. The man at the far end of the table, she would later learn, was Danny. He was watching this unfold with the expression of someone watching a nature documentary reach an unexpected turn. Mr. Yoon continued the meeting. He spoke about distribution routes and product movement and Tuesday logistics in the kind of clean, operational language that sounded, to Kezia's ears, exactly like a conversation about food suppliers. Which is exactly what she assumed it was, because she had been managing food supplier logistics for 2 years and the vocabulary mapped perfectly. She listened for about 90 seconds. Then she leaned forward. "Okay, but if your Tuesday delivery is coming from the north side, why are you routing through downtown? That adds 40 minutes minimum and you're paying for that in overtime. If you restructure to come through the east corridor and hit the second stop before the first, you cut the route by almost a third." Silence. The specific kind of silence that happens when something unexpected has been said and everyone in the room is simultaneously processing it and processing each other's processing of it. The 3 men from the door turned, slowly, to look at Mr. Yoon. Not quickly, slowly. The way people turn when they need a moment to compose their faces before anyone sees them. Mr. Yoon sat very still. Something moved behind his eyes that was not visible in any other part of his face. "She makes a valid point," he said finally, in the same measured tone he used for everything. "Restructure the Tuesday route." Kezia nodded, satisfied. "I'll put the delivery away now." She got up, retrieved her dolly, went into storage, and spent the next 20 minutes organizing product with the focused efficiency of someone who had completely solved the problem she came in to solve and was now on to the next one. In the back room, nobody spoke for almost a full minute after she left. Danny looked at Mr. Yoon. Mr. Yoon looked at the table. One of the doormen blinked, which was, for him, the equivalent of an extended emotional response. "She thought we were talking about chicken," Danny said very carefully in Korean. "I know," said Mr. Yoon, also in Korean. "She optimized the Tuesday route." "I know. She walked in with a clipboard and, Danny." "Yes, boss. Restructure the Tuesday route." Kezia Marshall had just optimized a drug trafficking operation by approximately 34%. She thought she had been helpful at a staff meeting about food suppliers. She would never know the difference. Mr. Yoon would never tell her. He went home that evening and sat in his apartment, clean, minimal, expensive, silent, and thought about what it meant that a waitress with a delivery dolly had identified a logistical inefficiency that had cost his organization money for 3 years in under 2 minutes while also managing 60 pounds of catering product. He thought about it for a long time. Then he made himself dinner, alone as always, and ate it at a counter in his kitchen in silence, and tried to remember the last time someone had surprised him. He couldn't. Danny, meanwhile, had been recruited by Miss Gloria. This happened gradually and without Danny's full awareness. Miss Gloria, Kezia's grandmother, 74, formidably opinionated, completely unbothered by social convention, began appearing at the restaurant on Thursday mornings. She ordered hot tea. She sat at the table near the window. She talked to whoever was nearby, because Miss Gloria had never encountered a silence she wasn't willing to fill, and she found Mr. Yoon's silences particularly interesting in the way that complicated puzzles are interesting. "You eat here alone a lot," she said to him one Thursday, in the way that grandmothers say things that are observations but land like diagnoses. Mr. Yoon, who had been walking through the dining room to check something in the kitchen, stopped. He had not been addressed by a customer in a personal register since he had taken ownership. His associates did not address him personally. His employees were professionally warm and professionally distant. Miss Gloria was looking at him with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of someone who had been on the earth long enough to have stopped finding powerful men impressive. "I'm often here during off hours," he said, which was not an answer. "That's not what I said," said Miss Gloria. She poured her tea. "Sit down, baby. You look tired." He sat down. He did not know why he sat down. He was not accustomed to sitting down when directed to by customers. But there was something in her voice that his body responded to before his judgment could intervene. Something maternal and uncompromising that bypassed all his defenses because none of his defenses had been built to handle grandmothers. Kezia came out of the kitchen 10 minutes later, looked across the dining room, and stopped so completely she nearly dropped her tray. Mr. Yoon Jae-han, the most controlled and unreachable man she had encountered in her professional life, was sitting at a table with her grandmother. He had a cup of tea he hadn't ordered in front of him. Miss Gloria was talking. He was listening with the full, careful attention he gave to everything, and on his face was an expression Kezia had not seen before, not the careful neutrality of his professional mode, but something quieter and less defended. He looked, she thought, almost peaceful. She approached with the specific energy of someone who is not sure whether to intervene or document. "Mr. Yoon," she said carefully, "the Hendersons need their—" "Kezia, baby, hush," said Miss Gloria without turning around. "Jae-han was just telling me about his mother." The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. "Jae-han." Kezia looked at her grandmother, looked at Mr. Yoon. He met her eyes with an expression that was equal parts trapped and, she could not explain this, inexplicably at peace, as if being trapped here in this conversation at this table was somehow the least threatened he had felt in years. "His name," Kezia said carefully, "is Mr. Yoon." Miss Gloria finally looked at her granddaughter, with the patient expression of someone explaining something elementary. "His name is whatever he told me it was." She turned back to Mr. Yoon. "Now, you were saying about the restaurant in Busan." He was saying about the restaurant in Busan. Kezia stood next to the table for another 3 seconds, holding her tray, caught between the professional impossibility of what she was witnessing and the unnameable feeling of watching a door open in a house she had assumed was sealed. Then she went to attend to the Hendersons, because the Hendersons needed their food and the universe was not going to pause for her feelings about this. Every Thursday after that, Mr. Yoon sent Miss Gloria home in a private car service. He arranged it quietly, told no one, and when Kezia found out 3 weeks later from Miss Gloria herself, who mentioned it the way you'd mention the weather, she stood in her kitchen at home for a full 2 minutes just staring at the wall. She didn't know whether to be furious or touched. She landed on furious. It was safer. Danny found all of this profoundly moving and began showing up early on Thursdays to sit at a nearby table with invoices he was not actually reviewing, just to be present for whatever happened next. Within 2 weeks, Miss Gloria had started bringing him tea without asking and had begun referring to him as the sweet one. Danny texted his wife about this immediately. The grandmother called me sweet. Danny. I know. Is she adopting you? I think yes. This is the best thing that has ever happened. The raise happened in month 2 on a Tuesday, which seemed to be the day things happened in this story. Kezia had been preparing for the conversation since the previous Thursday. She had a document. Bullet points organized by impact category. A graph made in Google Sheets, clean, clearly labeled with a trend line, showing customer retention and Tuesday revenue before and after her involvement. She had printed a customer review from an online platform that mentioned her by name, highlighted her name, and written in the margin. C. Demonstrated value, customer level. She requested 15 minutes of Mr. Yoon's time. He indicated she could have 10. She sat down across from him, placed the document on the table, and watched him look at it with the expression of a man encountering a type of communication he had not previously had to process. His people did not bring documents. They brought information verbally, efficiently, in private. Nobody had ever made him a graph. Nobody had ever printed a customer review and highlighted their own name with marginal annotation. He looked at the graph for a moment. What is this line? He said. That's Tuesday revenue before me and after me, Kezia said. See the incline? That's called Kezia. He looked at the incline. He looked at her. He looked at the document. He read the customer review. He looked at the highlighted name and the annotation beside it and was quiet for a moment in the specific way he was quiet when he was making a calculation. Then he said, fine, and named a number. Kezia said, higher. He looked at her. She did not look away. He named a higher number. She accepted it, stood up, gathered her documents with the composed efficiency of someone who had expected this outcome, and went back to work. Mr. Yoon sat in the back office for the rest of the afternoon in a state that was not quite anger and not quite admiration and sat somewhere between them in territory he didn't have a name for. He called Danny. She brought a graph, he said. Danny was quiet for a moment. Was it a good graph? A long pause. It was a very good graph. Did she make a trend line? Danny. I'm just asking. She made a trend line. Danny absorbed this. You gave her the raise. Of course I gave her the raise. Because of the graph. Because she was correct. Because of the graph. Mr. Yoon ended the call. Danny texted his wife. The text was simply, the graph worked, and his wife, who had been receiving updates on this situation for 3 weeks, responded with 17 individual exclamation points and a request for more information that Danny could not fully provide because some things, even between spouses, require professional discretion. The performance review happened 2 weeks later and was, in ways nobody anticipated, a turning point. Mr. Yoon had introduced quarterly performance reviews as part of what he described as the legitimate operational structure of the restaurant. He sat Kezia down with a clipboard, a prepared document, and the measured calm of someone who had conducted difficult conversations with dangerous people and was fully prepared for a conversation with an employee. Kezia listened to his entire review. She nodded at appropriate intervals. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she reached into the folder she had brought with her, the folder he had noticed but assumed contained her notes, and placed her own clipboard on the table. Mr. Yoon looked at the clipboard. What is that? My review of management, Kezia said. I figured we were doing this. That is not how performance reviews work. It is now. Section 1. Communication. She looked at her notes. Mr. Yoon, you communicate in full silences and meaningful stares. That is not a management style, that is a hostage situation. Section 2. Availability. On 4 separate occasions in the past month, I needed operational decisions and you were in the back room in a meeting that was not on the schedule with people who are not on the staff roster. Section 3. In the corner of the room, Danny, who had been pretending to check inventory with the dedication of a man committed to his cover, made a sound that was not compatible with continued presence in the room. He walked into the walk-in freezer, closed the heavy door, and allowed himself approximately 45 seconds of private response to what he had just witnessed. Then he straightened his jacket, composed his face, and came back out. Nobody acknowledged this. Mr. Yoon's jaw had tightened in the way it tightened when he was managing a response that would, if released unmanaged, reveal too much. He looked at her document. It was thorough. It was fair. He recognized with the precise clarity of a man who dealt daily in accurate assessments, correct. Several items were not only valid but genuinely actionable. He took it home that evening. He read it twice with a pencil and made small marks next to 3 items. That week, he changed 3 things about how he operated in the restaurant, adjusted his availability, changed how he communicated schedule changes, made 1 structural decision about the weekly meeting format, and presented each change as his own initiative. Kezia noticed immediately. She said nothing. She opened the business Bible that night, turned to a fresh page, and wrote the date and a single line. Management read the review. Made changes. Won't say so. That's fine. It happened. She closed the book, turned off the light, and in her small apartment with the 1 window that didn't close all the way, she allowed herself 1 small, private smile before going to sleep. 300 miles away, in a clean, minimal, expensive apartment, Mr. Yoon sat at his kitchen counter with her performance review document and a cup of tea he had made himself. He read it 1 more time. He set it down. He looked at the wall for a while. Then he looked at the ceiling. Something was happening that he did not have a category for. That was unusual. He had a category for everything. He went to bed. He did not sleep well. He did not examine why. Miss Gloria had known since episode 2. She had known the way women who have lived long enough to see patterns know things. Not through evidence, not through analysis, but through the kind of bone-deep recognition that comes from having watched human beings be stupid about each other for 7 decades. She had seen it in the way Mr. Yoon's stillness changed quality when Kezia entered the room. She had seen it in the way Kezia talked about work, which was the way people talk about work when work has become the container for feelings they aren't ready to name yet. She had seen it in the photo on his phone. She had been sitting across from him one Thursday when a notification came through, and for just a half second, before he turned the screen, she had caught the image. A handwritten specials board in a dark restaurant. She had said nothing. She had sipped her tea. She had filed it away with everything else she knew. She told Danny everything on a Thursday in October, over tea, while Kezia was managing the lunch rush on the other side of the wall. Danny had started bringing his own mug on Thursdays. This had happened naturally over several weeks and nobody had formally discussed it. She's 27, Miss Gloria said. And she's been running from good things her whole life because good things in her experience have always come with a price she didn't expect. Her father left when she was 12, and before he left he told her she'd never amount to anything in the service industry. She's been trying to prove him wrong ever since. But proving someone wrong and believing in yourself are not the same thing. And she hasn't learned that yet. Danny held his mug and listened with the focused attention of a man receiving information that mattered. And him, Miss Gloria continued. He built a wall around himself so high that he forgot there was a person inside it. He thinks control is the same as safety. He thinks if he just manages everything carefully enough, nothing will be taken from him again. What he doesn't understand is that the wall doesn't protect what's inside. It just keeps it from growing. How does it end? Danny asked. Miss Gloria gave him the look of someone being asked a question with an obvious answer. Badly and then beautifully, the same as everything worth having. She sipped her tea. But they're going to take a long time getting there because they're both extremely committed to being difficult. Is there anything we can do? Miss Gloria considered this. We can be patient, she said. And we can be ready. Danny nodded. He finished his tea. He sat there for a moment in the particular piece of Miss Gloria's Thursday table, which had by now become a fixed point in his week. Then he texted his wife. The grandmother explained everything, and his wife responded, I need details, and Danny wrote back. She said badly then beautifully. And his wife sent back nothing for 30 seconds and then, okay, that's actually perfect. The midpoint of the story was a Monday night at the kitchen table of Kezia's apartment. Late, the building quiet around her. She had her business Bible open, a cup of tea gone cold beside her, and she was writing by the light of a single lamp the way she wrote when something needed to be processed rather than solved. The early entries in the business Bible read like survival mathematics. Rent divided by shifts. Tips averaged by day and section and customer type. How to negotiate with a food supplier who thought he could short her on weight because she was 23 and didn't look like she was paying close attention. She had been paying extremely close attention. She always was. The middle entries read like a business education she was giving herself. Operational structures. Customer retention patterns. How a restaurant's relationship with its neighborhood was more important than any individual menu item. Notes from the staff meeting she'd walked into. Distribution route optimization. North side to east corridor. Saves approximate 40 minutes. Applies to catering routes too. Follow up. She had followed up. It had worked. She had never connected the dots to what she had actually been optimizing. Then there were the entries about management. They started professionally. New owner. Unclear communication style. Strong operational instincts. Resistant to feedback. Responds to data. Approach with documentation. Clinical. Useful. The entries of someone mapping a difficult colleague. But they changed. Slowly and without announcement they changed. The way the light changes in a room when the sun moves and you don't notice it happening until suddenly the room is different and you can't say exactly when it shifted. The entries got longer. More specific. They stopped being assessments and started being observations. He took a photo of the specials board. I didn't see him do it, but the timestamp on his phone was 11:47 p.m. I wasn't there at 11:47 p.m. And later. He knows Miss Gloria's tea order without being told anymore. He has it ready when she arrives. He thinks nobody notices. I notice. And later still, in smaller handwriting as if she were trying to take up less space on the page. I think he's lonely in a way that has gone on so long he's stopped being able to feel it. I know what that looks like from the inside. She stopped writing. Read back what she'd written. Read it again. Then she wrote, underneath it, management is the most frustrating person I have ever worked for. Also the most. She stopped. Looked at what she had written. Uncapped her pen again and crossed out also. Firmly. Twice. Closed the book. Turned off the lamp. Sat in the dark in her apartment with the one window that didn't close all the way, while the city did its nighttime things outside, and did not think about what she had almost written. She was almost certain she wasn't thinking about it. The inventory scene happened in November, on a Thursday that ran late because the catering order for a corporate event had been significantly larger than anticipated, and the breakdown took until nearly midnight. Everyone else had gone home. Kezia was doing the post-event count in the dry storage room when she found the discrepancy. 2 units unaccounted for in the dry goods, which was small but wrong, and Kezia did not leave wrong things to sort themselves out. She was still there when Mr. Yoon came through to do his own walkthrough of the closed restaurant, as he sometimes did alone, in the way that owners of places that mean something to them sometimes need to be in those places in the quiet. He found her in the storage room with a clipboard and a flashlight and the specific focused expression of someone who was not going to leave until the numbers were right. There's a 2-unit discrepancy in dried goods, she said, without looking up, because she had heard him come in and had identified his footsteps by this point, the way you identify sounds that have become part of your environment. I'll send someone tomorrow, he said. I'll find it now, she said. He should have left. He had no operational reason to be in a storage room at midnight helping count dry goods. He was the owner of 3 other businesses, the head of an organization that moved significant money across the city, and a man who had not performed manual inventory since he was 19 years old working in his uncle's import warehouse in Incheon. He picked up a clipboard from the shelf. He started counting from the other end. They worked in silence for a while. The restaurant settled around them. The small sounds of a building at rest, the refrigeration unit cycling, the distant street noise coming through the walls. It was not uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who had spent enough time in the same space that silence between them had become textured rather than empty. She found the discrepancy at 12:17 am. A mislabeled box in the back section, counted under the wrong category. She corrected the inventory log, made a note in her clipboard about the labeling system. That was that. But neither of them left immediately. They stood in the storage room in the low light, and that should have been the natural end of it, and it wasn't, because something in the room had changed quality in the way that rooms do when the practical reason for being in them is finished and the real reason becomes visible. You worked in a restaurant before this, she said. It wasn't a question. A pause. My uncle's place. When I was young. Korean food? Everything. It was a small place. You cooked what the neighborhood needed. Another pause, smaller. My mother worked there too on weekends. Kezia looked at the shelf in front of her. That's why you bought this place. It was not a question either. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, the oxtail was similar to something she made. He said it in the flat, careful way of someone saying something true that they have not said before and are monitoring their own reaction to the saying of it. She didn't look at him. She had learned, by this point, that Mr. Yoon could handle a great many things, but direct eye contact during vulnerability was not among them, and looking away was a form of respect she had started offering without discussing it. My father told me the service industry was a dead end for dead ambitions, she said. He said that the week before he left. I was 12. She paused. I've been working in restaurants ever since. To prove him wrong? That's what I tell myself. She was quiet for a moment. I think actually I just love it. The floor. The way it runs when it runs right. The way you can feel the whole room at once. I think I would have done this anyway, even if he'd said something completely different. But I needed the anger to get started. So, he was quiet for a long time. Outside, a car passed. The refrigeration unit cycled down and then back up. I needed the anger too, he said finally, simply. She did look at him then, briefly, and what she saw in his face was the thing that was almost never there. Just a man without the performance, without the architecture of control he lived inside. Just the person underneath it, which was someone who had been through things, and was tired sometimes, and had bought a restaurant because it smelled like his mother's kitchen and couldn't say so. She looked away again. The dried goods count is still off by 2, she said. He looked at his clipboard. No, you corrected. I know. I'm saying it anyway. A beat. And then quietly, briefly, like something that had been waiting a long time to happen, he almost smiled. I'll fix it tomorrow, he said. They left separately. The restaurant locked up behind them, dark and warm and full of everything that hadn't been said but had been, somehow, communicated anyway. Kezia sat in her car for a few minutes before starting it. She opened the business Bible. Looked at the last entry. Read the crossed-out word. She didn't uncross it. She closed the book and drove home. November became December. The restaurant thrived. The fusion menu developed a following. A food blog mentioned the kimchi cornbread. Miss Gloria was photographed at her Thursday table by a writer doing a neighborhood piece, and the caption described her as the restaurant's unofficial grandmother, which delighted Miss Gloria and caused Kezia a complicated mixture of pride and exasperation that had become her default setting for most things involving her grandmother and the restaurant simultaneously. And then, in January, the federal investigators made their move. The accounts were frozen on a Tuesday morning. Of course, it was a Tuesday. There was a notice on the door, official, federal, unmistakable, when Kezia arrived at 7:30 for prep. She read it standing in the cold with her breath making small clouds in the January air. She read it twice, the way she read everything that mattered. Then she went inside. Mr. Yoon was at a corner table. He had been there, she understood, for some time. He was in a regular shirt, no jacket, no armor, with the first 2 buttons open at the collar, and he was sitting in the specific stillness of a person whose stillness had changed quality. Not the controlled stillness of a man managing his environment. The stillness of a man who had run out of things to manage. He looked, for the first time since she had known him, like someone who was tired. She put her bag down at the host stand. She went to the kitchen and made 2 cups of coffee the way she made coffee when something needed to be handled. Strong, no nonsense, in the big mugs that were for staff, not customers. She brought them to his table. She sat down across from him without being invited and put one of the mugs in front of him. He looked at the mug, looked at her. You look terrible, she said. The restaurant may be seized, he said. I know. I just said you look terrible. He looked at the table. She let the silence be what it was for a moment. Not the comfortable inventory silence, but the harder kind, the kind that has weight and edges. Then she reached into her bag and put the business Bible on the table between them. She opened it to a section near the back. Pages dense with her handwriting, diagrams, calculations, printouts folded and tucked between the pages. She slid it toward him. "I've been working on this for 4 months," she said. "Real supplier contracts. Clean books. A revenue model that doesn't need anything cleaned. A catering expansion using this kitchen as the base that I've been running numbers on since September." She paused. 61 pages. I counted. He looked at the book. He reached out and turned the pages slowly, reading. She drank her coffee and looked out the window at the January street and did not watch him read, or tried not to, or told herself she wasn't. He read for 11 minutes. She knew because she could see the clock on the wall from where she was sitting, and she had, despite her best efforts, been counting. He turned to page 34. She knew which page it was because she knew this document the way she knew the restaurant menu, by feel, by location, by what everything meant in the sequence of the whole. Page 34 was the catering expansion model. Her name was on it. Not as a formality, but in the header in her own handwriting, because she had written this for herself before she knew anyone else would read it, and she had labeled it the way you label something that belongs to you. Something changed in his face when he reached that page. Small, quiet, the door-opening shift she had seen once before in a storage room in November. He kept reading. He turned to page 47. Page 47 was a note she had written to herself at 2 in the morning 3 months ago, when she had been stuck on a particular problem and had worked around it by being honest about why. The note said, "This kitchen has more potential than anyone running it currently understands, including me, but I'm working on it." He stopped. "When did you do this?" he said. "Nights. Weekends. During your staff meetings when I was supposed to be doing inventory." "You were supposed to be doing inventory. And you were supposed to be running a restaurant," she said. "We both had alternate activities." He looked at page 47 again. He looked at it for a long time. "This catering model," he said. "It's yours. It's a proposal for the... It's yours. You built it. It has your name on it." A pause. "Literally. You wrote Kezia's concept. Do not steal on the header. I have trust issues." He looked up at her. And there it was, the real thing, the unguarded almost smile that appeared so rarely and so briefly that seeing it felt like catching something in the wild. "I know," he said. She looked at her coffee mug. She looked at the federal notice still visible through the front window. She looked at the table between them where her business Bible was open to the page where she had, at 2 in the morning, admitted her own limitations in writing. "Can you use it?" she asked. "The plan. Can you use it to fix this?" He closed the book carefully. He straightened it on the table with the precise, deliberate movement he gave to things that mattered. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. The federal negotiation happened the following week, in a conference room in a building downtown that had the specific gray neutrality of places where consequences are decided. Mr. Yoon arrived alone, which surprised Agent Torres, the lead investigator, a woman in her 40s with the efficient, unimpressed bearing of someone who had sat across from men like Yoon many times and found them largely predictable. He was not predictable. He placed Kezia's 61-page document on the table, opened it to the restructuring plan, and proceeded to negotiate his cooperation agreement using it as the foundation, demonstrating, with the clean precision of someone who had spent decades thinking 4 moves ahead, that the restaurant's legitimate business model was not only viable but already operational, already generating real revenue, and already structured in a way that made the criminal overlay unnecessary going forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not show anything on his face. He simply laid out the case the way a man lays out a case when the case is actually good and he knows it. Torres read the document. She turned pages. She made notes in the margins with a pencil. She flipped to the catering expansion section and read it twice. "This is solid work," she said, and she did not say it generously. She said it the way people trained to assess things say things when the thing is genuinely what it is. "Yes," he said. "Who put this together?" "My operations director." Torres looked at him. "The operations director who has been working in a restaurant you were using as a front for the better part of a year." "Yes. We'll need to speak with her. She's currently in the restaurant parking lot," he said, arguing with a fish supplier about a $40 discrepancy in last week's delivery. Torres was quiet for a moment. Then she stood and went to the window, which looked out not on the conference room building's parking lot but on the street, and through some arrangement of sight lines and city geometry, actually did look out toward the restaurant 2 blocks east. Kezia was not visible from here, but the principle of her was present in the room, which was perhaps the point. She know what she's been working in the middle of? Torres said. Yoon was quiet for a moment. She thought the Tuesday meetings were about chicken delivery routes. Torres turned from the window. For how long? 8 months. And she still optimized them? By 34%. Torres looked at the document again. She looked at Yoon. She had been doing this job for 17 years and she had developed, over that time, the ability to read rooms and people with a clinical accuracy that had served her extremely well in courtrooms and conference rooms alike. She read this room now. She read the man across from her. She read the document, which was not the document of someone covering their tracks, but the document of someone who had spent months building something real because she believed in the building of it. "You're in love with her," Torres said. The sentence landed in the room without warning, the way true things sometimes land. Not as an accusation but as a fact that has simply been waiting for someone to say it out loud. Yoon straightened slightly in his chair. "I'm cooperating with a federal investigation." Torres almost smiled. That's not a no. He had nothing to say to that. It was the first time in the negotiation, the first time, arguably, in years that he had had nothing to say. He adjusted his jacket. He looked at the document. He said, "The terms on page 12, and the conversation returned to logistics where he was comfortable, where he had always been comfortable, where the terrain was known and the variables were manageable. He went home that evening and lay on his bed and looked at his ceiling for 4 hours. He was not a man who stared at ceilings. He was a man who acted, planned, executed. The ceiling offered none of these options. It just reflected his situation back at him in the specific blank way of ceilings. He texted Danny at 11:30 p.m. Torres said something. Danny responded in 40 seconds, which meant he had been awake. What did she say? She said, "I was in love with Kezia." 30 seconds of nothing. Then, "What did you say?" "I said I was cooperating with a federal investigation." 20 seconds. Then, "Boss, I know Danny. That's not a no. I know Danny. So, go to sleep, Danny." "Okay, but..." Yoon put his phone face down on the nightstand, looked at the ceiling some more. At some point he fell asleep. He dreamed about his mother's kitchen in a way he hadn't in years, specific and sensory. The smell of it, the sounds of it, the warmth of a place that had known him when he was small and unguarded and had not yet built anything that needed protecting. He woke up and lay there for a moment, between the dream and the morning, in the particular vulnerability of early consciousness. Then he got up and made coffee and went to work. Miss Gloria called Kezia on a Wednesday evening and said, in the uncomplicated tone she used for all logistical matters, "Come for dinner Sunday. I'm making jollof." Kezia said she'd be there. Miss Gloria called Mr. Yoon on Thursday morning, over tea, and said, also in the uncomplicated tone, "Come for dinner Sunday. I'm making jollof." Mr. Yoon, who had been sitting across from her for 2 months and had developed, despite his best efforts, a genuine inability to say no to her, said he would be there. She told neither of them about the other. Sunday arrived. Kezia got there first 20 minutes early, and sat at her grandmother's kitchen table peeling vegetables and being comfortable in the specific way of a person in the place they feel most at home. Miss Gloria moved around the kitchen in her efficient, unhurried way, and the jollof was already doing what jollof does. Filling the entire building with the kind of smell that is not just food but memory, warmth, the accumulated evidence of people being fed and cared for over time. At 6:20, the doorbell rang. Miss Gloria said, "Get that for me, baby. My hands are full." And Kezia went to the door and opened it. Mr. Yoon stood on the front step in his coat, holding a bottle of wine that he had clearly chosen carefully, looking at Kezia with an expression that cycled through confusion, recognition, and the specific betrayal of a man who has just understood the shape of what has happened to him. She looked at him with an expression doing the same cycling in a different register. They both looked at Miss Gloria, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway with a wooden spoon and the expression of someone who has successfully executed a plan she developed weeks ago and is experiencing only satisfaction about it. "Oh good," she said. "You're both here. Sit down, the food's almost ready." "Grandma," said Kezia, "I made jollof." "That is not the Jahan, baby." She likes her jollof with extra pepper. You should know that about her. Mr. Yoon, whose entire operational life had been built on anticipating situations and controlling outcomes, had not anticipated this situation and could not control this outcome. He had been outmaneuvered by a 74-year-old woman with a wooden spoon. He stepped inside. He sat down. He was raised to sit down in someone's grandmother's house. His upbringing had not adequately prepared him for the situation the sitting down placed him in, but the sitting down itself was instinctive and immediate. Kezia looked at her grandmother. Why are you like this? Because you're 27 years old and you're still pretending you don't feel things, Miss Gloria said, simply and without cruelty. Sit down and eat your food. Dinner lasted 2 hours. Miss Gloria carried the entire conversation with the effortless authority of someone who had been the most interesting person in every room she'd ever occupied and knew it without being vain about it. She talked about the restaurant, its history in the neighborhood, the way it had been a gathering place for 30 years before Kezia worked there. She talked about food as community infrastructure, the way certain kitchens become load-bearing walls in the life of a neighborhood. She talked about building things that last, and she said it looking at neither of them in particular and both of them completely. Kezia and Mr. Yoon spoke to each other exactly twice during dinner, both times about the food, both times with the careful neutrality of people managing significant voltage in a small space. Danny, who was waiting in the car outside because he had driven Yoon and had been told to wait, spent the 2 hours texting his wife a running update. They've been in there 45 minutes and she made jollof and I can see the kitchen window from here. The grandmother is just talking and finally, I think something is happening. And his wife, Danny Geo, stand closer to the window and Danny, I'm in the car. And his wife, get out of the car. And Danny, I'm not getting out of the car. And a pause and then, I got out of the car. Kezia left first. She said goodnight to her grandmother with the specific mix of exasperation and bottomless love that had characterized their relationship for 27 years. She put on her coat. She went out the front door into the January night where the streetlight made a small warm circle on the pavement and the cold was the clean, still kind, and she stood there for a moment in that circle of light, breathing in the cold air and trying to organize herself. She heard the door behind her, his footsteps on the front step. They stood outside Miss Gloria's house in the kind of silence that is not empty but full of 10 months and 2 people and a restaurant and a business Bible and an inventory room at midnight and a federal notice on a Tuesday door and 61 pages that he had read like they were sacred. She ambushed us, Kezia said. Yes. With jollof. It was very good jollof. Don't compliment the jollof right now. Why not? Because I'm trying to be annoyed and you're making it hard. The streetlight hummed above them. A car passed somewhere on the next block. Danny, 20 feet away in the shadow near his car, was not breathing. Page 47, Yoon said. Kezia went very still. What? Your business plan. Page 47. You wrote. And he had memorized it. She realized. He had read it and kept it. This kitchen has more potential than anyone running it currently understands, including me. But I'm working on it. He paused. I have spent my entire life in rooms full of people who only told me what I wanted to hear. Every person in every room always performing, always positioning. You wrote a note to yourself, in a private document, at 2 a.m, admitting your own limitations. He stopped. I didn't know people still did that. She looked at him, at the man underneath the jacket who had taken a photo of her handwriting at midnight, who had memorized page 47, who drove her grandmother home every Thursday without telling anyone, who had sat at a corner table in an empty restaurant and been taken apart by 61 pages of her dreams without a single word of complaint. It was a private document, she said. You wrote, do not steal. Not, do not read. That is such a criminal lawyer answer. And there it was, the real smile, the unguarded one. The one that changed his whole face and appeared so rarely that when it came it was like light through a specific crack in a wall you'd been looking at for months. I've been spending time with one, he said. The street light hummed. The cold was clean and still. Danny had stopped not breathing and started very quietly not moving. If this is you asking me something, Kezia said, and her voice was steady in the way that things are steady when they've been decided and the deciding is finished and what's left is just the saying, you need to actually ask it. I don't speak in silences and meaningful stares. That's your thing. The longest pause of everything. 10 months compressed into a few seconds of cold January air, and a streetlight making its small warm circle on the pavement. Have dinner with me, he said. A real one. Not. He glanced at the house behind them. Ambush Jaloff. You're going to be so bad at dating. Probably. Like genuinely terrible. Almost certainly. She looked at him. He looked at her. The city did its quiet nighttime things around them. From inside the house, through the closed door, came the faint sound of Miss Gloria humming to herself in the kitchen, unhurried and satisfied. Okay, Kezia said. Behind them, inside, Miss Gloria turned from the window she had absolutely been standing at, walked back to her kitchen, and said to nobody in particular, Finally, I'm not young. Danny, outside in the cold, texted his wife for words. Badly then beautifully. Jollof. His wife sent back 17 exclamation points. He put his phone away. He stood in the cold night air outside a house on a street in a city and felt, privately, that this had been one of the better evenings of his professional life. 1 year later, on a Saturday in January, the restaurant ran its fullest service of the year. Kezia's name was on the door. Not metaphorically, literally on the door in the same clean signage as the restaurant name, because she had negotiated it into the partnership agreement with the specific calm of someone who had been practicing that particular negotiation in her head for 12 months and was ready for it. The catering company operated out of the kitchen on weekday mornings. 3 food publications had reviewed the Fusion Soul Food menu in the preceding year. The word that appeared in all 3 reviews independently was revolutionary. The kimchi cornbread had a waiting list on weekends. Gerald, Terrence, and Big Mike, who had never officially confirmed or denied these names, wore slightly less severe ties. It had happened gradually and nobody had discussed it. Danny had a title now. He had given it to himself, submitted it in a formal email, and received no objection from ownership. Miss Gloria's Thursday table had a small handwritten reserved sign that had been there so long it had become part of the restaurant's furniture. Yoon sat at his corner table on that Saturday with what appeared to be paperwork, but was actually the particular kind of attentiveness that looks like paperwork when you need it to. Danny sat across from him reviewing invoices he had already reviewed. You're staring again, Danny said. I'm reviewing floor operations. She caught you staring about 4 minutes ago, and she's been fixing her locks differently ever since because she wants to look better, and she thinks you haven't noticed. Yoon did not look up from his paperwork. I noticed. Danny looked at him. At this man he had known for 9 years, who had been unreachable for most of them, who was now sitting in a restaurant on a Saturday afternoon watching the woman he loved run a floor she was born to run, noticing that she had fixed her hair. This is genuinely the most human I've ever seen you, Danny said. Danny. Yes, boss. Go sit somewhere else. Danny picked up his invoices. He crossed the restaurant. He sat at a table near Miss Gloria's. Miss Gloria was already there, because it was Thursday adjacent and she arrived when she arrived. She looked at him and poured him a cup of tea from her pot without being asked. He accepted it. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the kind that belongs to people who have watched something come together and are now simply present in the having come together of it. Kezia swung past Yoon's table on her way through the floor, moving with the particular fluid efficiency of someone completely in her element. She set down a small plate of cornbread without breaking stride. Stop staring at my floor like you own it, she said, already moving away. I do own it, he said. We own it, she said, and was gone, already 3 tables further on, already somewhere else, already running the thing she had built. He looked at the cornbread. He looked at the door she had disappeared through. In his inside jacket pocket was a folded piece of paper, a note he had written that morning, which he would leave on her desk before the end of service. It said, Page 47. You were right. You figured it out. No signature. He didn't need one. Later, Kezia would find it. She would read it twice, standing at her desk with her coat half on and the day winding down around her. She would fold it carefully and open the business Bible and place it at the very front, before the first page, before all the rent calculations and tip averages and route optimizations and the entry with the crossed-out word, right at the beginning of everything. She wouldn't tell him she did that. He would already know. This is a story about two people who were both, in their different ways, exhausted by who they had been performing. Kezia had performed fine for so long, fine with being overlooked, fine with being capable without credit, fine with wanting things she hadn't let herself fully believe she deserved, that she had mistaken the performance for her actual personality. Yoon had performed untouchable for so long, controlled, sufficient, needing nothing, that he had mistaken the wall for the person. What the restaurant gave them, slowly and without announcement, was a place where those performances kept failing. Not dramatically, not in speeches, just incrementally, in inventory rooms and Thursday tables and pie charts and 47-page notes written at 2 in the morning to nobody but yourself. The first lesson this story carries is simply this: the most important person to be seen by is yourself. Kezia spent years being the most capable person in rooms that refused to acknowledge it. But the business Bible, that private document she wrote for no audience, was always there. It was always honest. It was always building something, even when she couldn't see what she was building toward. She had to be the first one to take herself seriously before anything else could. The second lesson lives in what Mr. Yoon built and what it cost him. Power without warmth is an empire with nothing at the center. He had loyalty, strategy, money, control, and ate alone every night in a restaurant he bought because it smelled like his mother's kitchen. What he needed was not more power. What he needed was a reason to come home. The third lesson belongs to Miss Gloria, who knew from the beginning and waited. She knew that some things cannot be rushed, only witnessed. That the role of the people who love us is sometimes simply to be present and patient and to make jollof when the moment arrives. That you can see clearly what others cannot see about themselves, and the most loving thing you can do with that clarity is hold it gently and wait. And the fourth lesson, the quiet one, the one underneath all the others, is about what it means to build something that lasts. Not an empire, not a survival strategy, something that feeds people, something that is warm and real and specific, that smells like someone's grandmother's kitchen and knows your order and asks after your family and has been there long enough to be part of the neighborhood's identity. That kind of legacy doesn't announce itself. It just accumulates, table by table, Tuesday by Tuesday, until one day you look up and your name is on the door and you realize you didn't get there by proving anything to anyone. You got there by simply, stubbornly showing up. The restaurant is still open. The cornbread is still made fresh every morning. Miss Gloria's table still has its reserved sign. Danny still reviews invoices he has already reviewed. And every Tuesday at approximately 1:47 p.m., Kezia looks at the door the way you look at something that changed your life by walking through it unannounced on an ordinary afternoon. Not every Tuesday, just sometimes, just for a moment. Then she goes back to running the floor. It runs perfectly. Thank you for spending 40 minutes with Kezia, with Yoon, with Miss Gloria and Danny, and a restaurant that smelled like someone's grandmother's kitchen. If this story did something to you, if the inventory scene stayed with you, if page 47 made you think of something you've been meaning to write down, if the jollof ambush made you want to call someone, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Stories like this one exist because you watch them, share them, and come back for the next one. Subscribe if you haven't. Ring the bell. Leave a comment telling me which lesson hit you hardest, or which character you saw yourself in most. I read every single one. And I'll see you next week, with a new story, the same promise, and hopefully something that earns another 40 minutes of your time. Thank you for being here from the beginning.